Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. It is Wednesday, of course, so we're expecting Prime Minister's questions at any moment. Boris Johnson is in the chamber. Let's have a quick word with Charlotte Ivers, who's here with us, political correspondent, of course. The usual preamble, Charlotte. Pretty bad day for old Keir Starmer last week after the end of PMQs. He ended up in a bit of a stramash, as we would say in Scotland, with the Prime Minister. What are you expecting today?
Well, it's all been about travel, hasn't it? It's all been about this policy of hotel quarantine,
or
no travel, as the case may be.
Yeah.
And hotel quarantine and everything that goes with it only comes in on the 15th of February. So could see Keir Starmer saying this is a bit late in the day, isn't it? He asked last week as well about this. And of course, Boris Johnson said that the system in place was fine. He's now added to it. Yeah. Maybe he'll be able to go on that disconnect. But to be honest, they are doing it now. It's hard to know what Starmer can push them on.
Well, exactly. Because, I mean, all Boris needs to say is, well, we're giving people an opportunity to get back into the country without having to be fined effectively £1,750 to pay for a quarantine that they don't need to do. I mean, it clearly seems to me that Matt Hancock's brought this in with all the punishments and the fines and all the rest of it in order to stop people from going anywhere.
Yes, although it's always been illegal for people to go on holiday from the UK. So as you say, this is people who are UK residents coming back. Pretty big numbers, people coming from those red zones. It's about just over 1,000 a day, people coming in. So there does need to be something pretty substantial in place if the government is going to stop these new variants from entering the country. OK,
well, let's go to Parliament right now. Here's Boris Johnson.
Point about the extension of business rate relief. He knows that this government is committed to supporting businesses and people, livelihoods throughout the pandemic. That is what we will continue to do, but he should wait until the budget for the Chancellor to explain exactly what we're going to do.
Mr. Speaker, I think that answer was that the Prime Minister can't give an answer yet. But hundreds of thousands of businesses are affected by this. And the trouble is, Mr. Speaker, that businesses don't work as slowly as the Prime Minister. They need an answer now. As the British Chamber of Commerce says, businesses simply can't wait until the March budget. Let me try another vitally important question for businesses and for millions of working people. Can the Prime Minister confirm today that the furlough scheme will be extended beyond April?
Mr. Speaker, I think most people in this country are aware that we're going through a very serious pandemic in which rates of infection have been steadily brought down thanks to the efforts of the rich people. I think also members of this House are familiar with the notion that in just a few days we will be setting out a roadmap for the way out of this pandemic, a roadmap that I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues will support, though the support, as we know, tends to be a transitory thing, Mr. Speaker. One week we have it, the next week we don't, but he won't have to contain himself for very long.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, let me let the Prime Minister into a secret. He can take decisions for himself, and he doesn't need to leave everything to the 11th minute. If I were Prime Minister, I'd say to businesses, we'll support you now. We'll protect jobs now. Because the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Institute of Directors and the British Chamber of Commerce have all said the same thing. They all say, Prime Minister, they can't wait until the budget. The Prime Minister may disagree with me, but he's actually disagreeing with businesses. Why does the Prime Minister think he knows better than British business?
Mr. Speaker, I think that most business people that I've talked to a great many in the last 12 months, would agree that there is no government around the world that has done more to support business, wrapping our arms around business. And actually, I'm delighted to hear this enthusiasm for business from the Labour Party when they stood on a manifesto to destroy capitalism at the last election, and indeed to dismantle the very pharmaceutical industry, Mr. Speaker, that has provided the vaccines on which we now rely. Will he now repudiate that policy, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, we all know what the Prime Minister once said he wanted to do to business. We on these benches would rather listen to businesses. So we've no decision on business rates, no decision on furlough. Let's try another crucial issue. And Prime Minister, no excuse for delaying this time, because this has to be decided before the March budget, and the Prime Minister doesn't need to check with the Chancellor. So will the Prime Minister now commit to extending the evictions ban on residential properties beyond February the 21st?
Mr. Speaker, I've said repeatedly that what we will do in this government and throughout this pandemic is put our arms around the British people, support them throughout the pandemic, and make sure that people are not unfairly evicted during the pandemic. That is what we will do. What I hope very much, Mr. Speaker, is that we may hear from the right honourable gentleman opposite that he not only has now had a Damascene conversion to the importance of business, but a Damascene conversion to supporting all the government's policies to support business, rather than sniping from the sidelines. Why doesn't he just get behind us and back the government, back us in our efforts to back business and back the British people?
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures from a man who wrote 2 versions of every column he ever wrote as a journalist, who proposed Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize and gave Dominic Cummings a pay rise. Back to the question. Another area where the Prime Minister repeatedly delayed and now changes policy pretty well every day is securing our borders against variants of COVID. Every week the Prime Minister comes here and says we've got one of the toughest regimes in the world. We know his Home Secretary disagrees with him. We know the Health Secretary disagrees with him. Luckily, Mr. Speaker, Oxford University keep track of how tough border restrictions are in every country. They say that there are at least 33 countries around the world which currently have tougher restrictions for the United Kingdom. 33, Prime Minister, including Canada, Denmark, Japan, Israel. There are many others. In fact, they say we're not even in the top bracket of countries for border restrictions. 50 days after we first discovered the South African variant, 50 days. How does the Prime Minister explain that?
Mr. Speaker, there are some countries in Europe that do not even have a hotel quarantine scheme, such as the one we're putting in on Monday. We have amongst the toughest border regimes anywhere in the world. And people should understand that on a normal day, Mr. Speaker, at this time of year, you could expect about 250,000 people to be arriving in this country. We've got it down to about 20,000, 5,000 of them whom are involved in bringing vital things into this country, such as medicines and food, as we discussed last week, and he agreed that was a good idea, Mr. Speaker. Unless he actually wants to cut this country off from the rest of the world, which I think last week he said he didn't want to do, unless, of course, he's changed his mind again, Mr. Speaker. I think that this policy is measured, it is proportionate, it is getting tougher from Monday. I hope that he supports it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is this. The Prime Minister is failing to give security to British businesses, and he's failing to secure our borders. The Prime Minister often complains that we never put forward constructive proposals. So here's 2 for him. Support businesses and protect jobs now by extending furlough, business rate relief and VAT cuts for hospitality. And second, secure our borders with a comprehensive hotel quarantine on arrival. No more delays. Will he do it?
Mr. Speaker, we've just announced the quarantine policy, which, as I've said to the House, is amongst the toughest in the world, and tougher than most other European countries, certainly. I'm delighted that he's now supporting business in his latest stunt of bandwagoneering, not a policy for which he was famous before, Mr. Speaker. But he moves from one side of the other in the debate throughout this crisis. And some people, Mr. Speaker, some people have said that this is a good crisis, Mr. Speaker. Some people have said this is a good crisis. Some people have said that this crisis is a gift that keeps on giving, Mr. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those people sit on the Labour front bench. I think it is disgraceful that they should say those things. I believe this is one of the biggest challenges this country has faced since the Second World War. And thanks to one of the fastest vaccine rollouts anywhere in the world, I believe it is a challenge this country can meet and is meeting. And I believe that of that vaccine rollout programme, this House and this country should be very proud.
This is Boris Johnson revealing there that Lord Falconer, of course, made a speech earlier on to some lawyers at the weekend saying that he thought that coronavirus was the gift that keeps on giving. Charlotte Ivers is here with me. Bandwagoneering, apparently, is a new accusation that Boris Johnson levels at Sir Keir Starmer. What did you make of it?
I think at the start there, certainly, it felt like we were in a different age. They were all a bit disconnected, weren't they? Boris Johnson having a go at Keir Starmer for Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, Keir Starmer having a go at Boris Johnson for columns he wrote as a newspaper columnist. It's not really that topical, to be honest.
It's not really, is it? And of course, as you said earlier, before we started, it's difficult for Keir Starmer to accuse the government of not doing anything when, as he said, they've just announced that they're doing what the Labour Party have said they should be doing, and it's difficult to argue you should start it now rather than Monday.
Exactly. I think what was interesting there, though, is Starmer picking up on that Oxford University study saying that 33 countries have tougher border controls in place than we do. Because I've been watching Boris Johnson, every PMQ say we have some of the toughest border restrictions in the world, and thinking, no, we don't. We just absolutely don't. You try to get into some countries in Southeast Asia, you'll be held in the airport for 48 hours until you've had multiple tests. We don't. So it's good that Starmer has now got the data to back that up rather than just us all having a broad sense that that's wrong.
Yes.
What Johnson could say is we have a perfectly serviceable system in place. But he does have this overwhelming urge, doesn't he, to always say things are world-beating, the best in the world.
They do like to say that kind of thing, don't they, quite regularly? And of course, as we know, Ian Blackford is now up, so let's go to him.
Crisis. The Prime Minister has the power to tackle child poverty right now by making the £20 uplift to universal credit permanent and by extending it to legacy benefits. The Tory government's been stalling on this for months. Will the Prime Minister finally act, or will he leave millions of children out in the cold?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the whole House in this country should be proud of the way we've tried to look after people, the poorest and neediest families throughout the country, not just with universal credit, which the party opposite would actually abolish, Mr. Speaker, but by helping vulnerable people with their food and their heating bills, the £170 million winter grant scheme, looking after people with the free school meal vouchers. And as I've said before, Mr. Speaker, we all put our arms around the people of this entire country throughout the pandemic.
Let's return to Scotland with Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that was pathetic. That was no answer. We're talking about 1.3 million children under 5 in poverty. Let me quote, "She cried on her doorstep because I gave her nappies, wipes and winter clothes for her child. I went away with a lump in my throat." These are the words of Emily, a baby bank worker who's supporting families that the Tories have pushed into poverty through a decade of cuts. They don't need more empty words from a Prime Minister who simply doesn't care enough to act. Mr. Speaker, this morning a new report from Citizen Advice Scotland warned that Tory cuts could reduce the value of universal credit by as much as a quarter just when people need this money the most. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other opposition parties ahead of the budget for an urgent summit on tackling child poverty, or will he be yet another Tory Prime Minister who leaves a generation of children languishing in poverty?
Mr. Speaker, I must say that I reject entirely what the Right Honourable Gentleman has just said, because I don't believe that any government could have done more to help the people of this country throughout this pandemic, and we will continue to do so. And yes, of course, we bitterly lament and reject the poverty that some families unquestionably suffer. And it is tragic that too many families have had a very, very tough time during this pandemic. But we will continue to support them in all the ways that we have set up. And I may say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, there is a profound philosophical difference between him and me, because the Scottish Nationalist Party is morphing into ever more a left-wing party that believes fundamentally. There you go, Mr. Speaker. That believes fundamentally that it is the duty of the taxpayer to pay for more and more and more. We want to get people into jobs, Mr. Speaker, and it's getting people, and it is in that respect that the Scottish Nationalist Party is, I'm afraid, failing their...
Well, Prime Minister, we both know that you're only teasing him and we're trying to wind up the leader of the SNP. Please, let's drop it. Let's move on, because
it doesn't take much there. Mr. Crisis, as he was referred to earlier, the Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, by mistake by Boris Johnson, interjecting once more, because Boris, Charlotte, continues just to poke him, doesn't he, calling it the Scottish Nationalist Party. He got away with it twice today.
He did, and then finally Lindsay Hoyle had enough. I think we're pretty much on about a 90% hit rate for him being called out by the Speaker on something or another. It's sort of like a disappointed school teacher, isn't it? You feel for those teachers doing those Zoom classes when you watch Lindsay Hoyle there.
Exactly right. And Ian Blackford not, of course, getting an answer to his question, will you meet me for a summit on child poverty? Well, I think the answer to that's pretty much a resounding no, isn't it?
I think that's probably a no. You're completely right. I think from Boris Johnson there, you heard that he will be making sure that these measures are in place until the end of the crisis, that some sort of measures are in place. You've got to feel for government ministers slightly, because we probably know they are going to extend this £20 increase. We know they're going to extend a lot of the things they're talking about, but they can't say that in public until the budget. So they end up giving us these wishy-washy filler answers, really, when actually they probably know either way what's going to happen.
Also very tricky for the SNP on finance, isn't it? Because they have actually got quite a lot of control over the way that they spend their money in Scotland, even if the UK government has given it to them, because we've been hearing stories, I think, recently that they haven't spent all of the furlough money and all of the money that they've been given by central government in London in the way that they were supposed to, as if they're kind of holding some of it back. So Mr Blackford, as ever, not asking for money this time, but sort of regarding the UK's spending as not enough.
Exactly, and this is going to be a bigger and bigger political battleground over the next few months in the run-up to the Scottish elections. Downing Street very, very concerned about the union, about the likelihood that the SNP are going to do very, very well in these elections, and they've had a big shake-up of what they call their union unit within Downing Street. It's now being run by Oliver Lewis, who was David Frost, the chief Brexit negotiator's deputy, and they are planning on throwing everything at it. They are very concerned that we could see a break-up of the union in the next couple of years.
And do you think there's an element of electioneering going on with the way that the COVID sort of lockdown is being dealt with as well? Because you can imagine there would be some in Downing Street who would say, we could time this brilliantly, as it is indeed, they used to do it in presidential elections in America, a bit of a foreign invasion just before the election, a bit of flag waving, could Boris Johnson be planning this kind of, late April sort of, suddenly all the shackles come off and we enter a new period of prosperity and positivism, and suddenly they do a lot better in the elections?
I think that's quite unlikely for one reason and one reason only, and that is that Boris Johnson himself is immensely unpopular in Scotland. One, the SNP sources...
I'm not talking about Scotland, I'm talking about just generally.
In the UK. Yeah. That could be the case. I think the main positive will be how well the vaccine programme has gone. A lot of people in government are thinking, look, we didn't get everything right all the way through, but if we can get the vaccine programme sorted, if we can be one of the first countries in the world to come out of this, then hopefully most things will be forgiven. That's their hope going into the elections.
I think so. Let's go back to Boris.
Council would be suffering as a result of the pandemic. And the Chancellor said that he would do everything, whatever it takes to help them. Yet the Tory-controlled Bolton Council has just announced 35 million cuts in pounds and an increase in the council tax budget for 3.8%. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents and my town that that money will be given to them, or will this join a long list of Tory failed promises?
Minister.
I want to congratulate, Mr. Speaker, the great Conservative-controlled Council of Bolton for everything they're doing and continue to do throughout this pandemic to look after the people of Bolton. I know what incredible work local officials do, and I thank them very much for it. And we believe, since we believe so strongly in local government, Mr. Speaker, as a creature of local government myself, I'm proud that we've invested £4.6 billion in supporting local government just so far in this pandemic.
Sajid Javid.
Mr. Speaker, from rainforests to coral reefs, the world's ecosystems are at risk of catastrophic decline. That was the conclusion of the Dasgupta review last week, which my right honourable friend rightly welcomed. This threat to our biodiversity is not just a moral failure, it is economically short-sighted too. When I asked Professor Dasgupta to carry out this work, he told me that it would not be complete until after the UK had hosted the COP26 summit. But now, given that the summit has been delayed until later this year, and that it will take place alongside our presidency of the G7, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the UK has been presented with a unique opportunity to show global leadership on how we can better protect our most precious asset, nature?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. And I thank him for what he's doing himself in this area. And I want the House to know that we want our COP, the UN COP26 summit, to be a landmark event, not just for tackling climate change, but also in biodiversity. And I think it's high time that the leaders of the world took a step to reverse the loss of habitats and species that we've seen over the last century.
Let's head up to Oxfordshire with Layla Moran. Layla Moran.
Oh, we should probably hear Layla Moran. I haven't heard from her for a while.
It's estimated that up to 400,000 people are living with the debilitating effects of long COVID, and some of these are NHS heroes who caught COVID in that first wave. Nearly a year later, I've heard from a doctor who says she wonders if she'll ever be able to walk unaided again, let alone manage a full day of work. Does the Prime Minister recognise that for this group, long COVID is an occupational disease? And will he set up a compensation scheme similar to what we offer our armed forces so that we ensure that those who have lost their livelihoods by saving lives are fully supported?
Thank the Honourable Lady, because she's right to highlight the incredible sacrifice and effort of NHS staff, many of whom sadly have contracted COVID in the course of their duties, and a great many of whom have sadly continued to be affected by that disease. We must study the long-term effects of COVID and make sure that we continue to look after our wonderful NHS staff throughout their careers.
To Yorkshire with Julian Sturdy.
That was Layla Moran from the Lib Dems, of course. You don't hear from the Lib Dems very much anymore. Charlotte Ivers is here with us. Sajid Javid as well making an appearance. Does that signal that that sort of normal relations have been resumed between him and Boris?
Well, he seems to be fairly supportive of the government. He has had his moments when he has criticised Boris Johnson. And of course, he was very critical of Boris Johnson during the leadership contest. But he seems to have realised that he can work with this government and is doing so. He's also done an awful lot of work on safeguarding vulnerable children as well. And he wants to make changes to the law to protect children who get into relationships with adults who aren't their teachers, because at the moment, the law on that is very, very unsure. So he is doing some good work from the backbenches. I don't think we've heard the last of him.
And of course, this climate change conference, which is supposed to be taking place in Glasgow towards the end of this year, it's still not clear really whether Glasgow is going to be able to host it, is it?
No, this is a big challenge for the UK. It's meant to be the great opportunity for us to launch ourselves back into the world, really. It's also meant to be the opportunity for Boris Johnson to highlight to Joe Biden what they have in common. They are both committed to tackling climate change, and perhaps some of their similarities may have been missed by the president because of comments Boris Johnson have made in the past. So the government are really hoping this can go ahead, but as you say, it's looking like it could be a bit risky.
Well, it's going to be difficult, isn't it, in Scotland, particularly if the people of Scotland are still under all sorts of restrictions from the SNP, and suddenly all these world leaders and their entourages are flying in private jets to Prestwick Airport to try and tell everybody to stop flying everywhere. You know, it's going to be very interesting indeed. Let's pop back to see what's going on at Prime Minister's Questions.
As we strive to recover from the damage done to so many families and businesses by the pandemic, will the Prime Minister commit to beginning the work on the eastern leg of HS2, starting in the northeast, to run simultaneously with the construction in the south, so that our region is not forced to wait another couple of decades for 21st century rail connectivity?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly confirm that we are going to develop the eastern leg as well as the whole of HS2, and he'll be hearing a lot more about what we're going to do with our national infrastructure revolution, Mr. Speaker, and about what we're going to do to improve not just rail transport, but road transport as well in the northeast.
Let's head south to Caroline Nance, lose audio only. Caroline Nance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no shortage of commitment or compassion in my town of Eastbourne for homeless people who are vulnerable and need complex support. However, neighbouring Brighton continues to send its homeless to our town, and we do not have the resources to meet this need. 3 homeless people have died, and I believe there will be inquests. Brighton is not engaging with Eastbourne's council in any meaningful way, and a further 51 placements have been made in recent weeks. Will my right honourable friend join with me in urging immediate engagement from Brighton and Hove council leaders on this as a matter of urgency?
Question on homelessness there from the Eastbourne MP on not on Zoom. Apparently things are still going a bit wrong with the connections down there. Let's finish up, Charlotte, with a little bit of a roundup of what we saw and heard today. Boris Johnson, reasonable performance, I suppose, managed to get through without really answering anything of any great significance.
I think so. Well, the first half of Keir Starmer's questions there were all about what might be in the budget and trying to secure commitments on that. Obviously, Boris Johnson is not going to make the first announcement of further spending plans in response to a question to Keir Starmer. So we got no responses to that, really. Then we went on to transportation, we went on to the hotel quarantine, and really, as you say, nothing on that either. Boris Johnson able to say we've brought in tougher regimes. Keir Starmer called him out on saying these are some of the toughest in the world by saying they aren't. We've got evidence to prove they aren't. Boris Johnson absolutely went again. No, they are some of the toughest in the world. So I guess they've got different definitions on that.
Yes, I suppose so. But again, it sort of highlights where it's difficult for Sir Keir Starmer to make any real inroads into government policy since he mostly agrees with it.
He does, and actually he's often called for the government to go further, and then they do. And sometimes, actually, quite often recently, Keir Starmer has said something first and then the government has followed him. I'm not sure he's been very good at making capital about that, pointing out, saying, look, that was me, actually.
Yeah.
But people don't want that as well. People don't want him saying, look, I'm the smart guy making politics out of this, I'm the winner here. So what does he do?
Well, that's it. A lot of people said last week when he was sort of being accused of not doing terribly well, that it's very difficult if you're the opposition leader when things are going well for the government. And things at the moment, aside from our criticism of Matt Hancock and these very draconian measures, things are going pretty well because the vaccine's working.
They are, and at the same time, the things that aren't going well, Keir Starmer, if he attacks the government on those, he's accused of nitpicking, he's accused of making political capital. But if he stays quiet, he's accused of not doing anything, letting the government get off. He's in a completely impossible position. I do not envy his team.
No, absolutely right. Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. That is Prime Minister's question.